So the next step, let's get this alternator assembly out of the way. So I'm gonna remove the serpentine belt and swing that alternator up and out of the way to give us access to the compressor down below. This bolt right here and this one over here, this one's accessible. They're both 12 millimeter. This one's accessible from a socket. This one is accessible with just a regular ratcheting wrench. 12 millimeter like this one. You have to use the open end to get down there and get it started. Then you can flip it around and ratchet it out. One of those is to release the bolt that allows this bracket to move around to put tension on the belt, but I can't figure out yet because I can't see anything down there what is what, so I'm just removing them for the time being. Right there is another 12 millimeter socket bolt that I'm removing. Removing another 10 millimeter bolt that's to the bracket on top of the alternator so I can get those wires and make more space. You will see that I have a 12 millimeter bolt or a 12 millimeter socket star socket, not the hex. The hex won't work because you got to get it lined up just right in order to get your pry bar into position. In order to take off the serpentine belt, there's no bolt adjustment. It's a hydraulic tensioner. And what you basically do is you have to push. I've got a breaker bar attached to a socket, and that socket, I've got a long lever bar on it. I'm going to put my shoulder under that and push up on it. And when you do that, you do it slowly because it's hydraulic. You don't want to burst anything. And you basically want to put your shoulder underneath it, because if you don't do that, then you're not going to have two hands free to work the belt loose. So I'm going to try to demonstrate that here. I'm going to put my light down. I'm going to get my shoulder underneath this bar. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but it is nice that you don't have a belt tension adjustment. So I'm going to loosen this. See if I can pull that belt off. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it without two hands. And you can see it's loose. No, I'm going to have to do it with two hands, so I'm going to have to turn the camera off. It takes a surprising amount of force on that lever bar to move that hydraulic tensioner, this way, enough to get enough slack in the belt to lift it off with two hands. So yeah, I had to put my shoulder under it. It worked. I got it off. It'll go back on the same way. I wanted to get this compressor wire out of the way, so I pulled this, squeezed it on the one side, pull it out, do the same thing down here, squeeze it, pull it through to the right. That will get the compressor cable free from the alternator, and hopefully it'll swing out of place once we do that. Once free, the alternator can swing up there and rest on top of the engine. The next step is the alternator bracket, which is a 12 millimeter nut right there, or bolt. 10 millimeters on the low pressure line right here. Break that loose. I can unscrew it with fingers. Get that low pressure line off there. Now for the two 12 millimeter bolts that are on top of the compressor, and there are two more underneath that I need to get to. So I jacked up the car a little bit again so that I can fit under there to grab those. Back underneath the car, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting my wrench in position to get the lower compressor bolts out. So I'm going to, right where that light's shining, I'm going to remove another clip so that I can bend this plastic out of the way so I can use a wrench. Okay, there's the rubber bent out of the way, and I've got a slight extension on this 12 millimeter bolt on the underside of the compressor. You can see that right there. And then the other one is just right up here. You can remove that one. Have to work with it a little bit. We should be good to go on the bottom too. The compressor's loose, and I need to get this hydraulic belt tensioner out of the way. So there's a T47 Torx that goes into that. I'm going to move that out so that I can get the compressor out. Once that hydraulic tensioner is out of the way, if you rotate pulley side up on the compressor, it should just pop right out, just like so. Here's the old compressor. Here's the new compressor. Buyer beware. I discovered when I opened this that the cable that they had with this one was about 6 inches too short to get all the way back up to the connection on the alternator where the cables come into the alternator. So I had to do a kludge job and patch in the cable that was on the old one on the new one, which I've done here. Tried to get those. I actually twisted those together and soldered them together and then wrapped them really well with electrician's tape, and hopefully those will hold for me. It's a bugger of a repair if I ever have to access those again, so I tried to make it as robust as I could. Yeah, not happy about that at all. But there it is. It's ready to put back in. This particular compressor came with a note on it that said this does not have oil in it, and so this is the oil that came with it. Now I got to go figure out how. There were no instructions with this compressor, which, you know, raises a few red flags with me. I'm going to see if I can find some information about how to add oil to a compressor, whether it's now through a port on here somewhere, or maybe just through the gauges, the gauge manifold set that you use to recharge the refrigerant in this thing once it's all put back together. I'm not sure which one of those, so I gotta go find out first. Here's some specs I found for the compressor oil that I'm supposed to add, because there is no oil in it right now. Compressor 4 ounces. I'm not replacing the evaporator. I am replacing the condenser, so that's 5 2/3. I'm not replacing the hoses, but they're not going to have any coolant in them, so I'm going to add another 1/3 of a fluid ounce to bring me up to 6. This isn't really a leak repair, it's kind of a full-blown thing. I'm going to ignore that. The dryer is on the condenser, but that adds 1/3 of an ounce. So 6 1/3 ounces. I put in, this is an 8-ounce bottle, and I dumped in a little bit. I dumped in about 6 1/3 ounces. So, and then I just put it on this inside of this low pressure port here. You take the bolt off and pull the little suction rubber thing, temporary, right there. Take that off. I'm leaving them covered because I want to keep it from getting dirt inside as I'm reinstalling. I'm only going to put those in at the last minute, or take them off at the last minute when I'm ready to bolt the other things in. Now I've got a gasket kit here, so whenever on the hoses they've got black gaskets on them, I'm going to replace them with green ones and lube them up with a little bit of this compressor oil. That's essential just to keep the system leak-free, especially if you're going to the trouble and expense of doing a new one. You want to make sure those are replaced. Alright, I'm going to start assembling, so I'm just going to do the reverse process to get everything back in, and we'll get into the expansion valve, which I've got sitting right there, and I've got to dig the dash apart to do that. These are the lower bolts that hold the compressor in place, and they get aluminum oxide on them and look pretty dingy, so it helps to take a wire brush like this one and just scrub them off, clean them up good, and prior to install. And if you see any others that have that white powder all over, it's good to scrub them down first. Hopefully you can see this, but here's an ultraviolet light on on the die that's supposed to light up. It's for spotting leaks. It looks kind of like predator blood. As you can see here, I'm hoping you can see this, but right around the edges of the pulley, the compressor pulley, you can see kind of a faint glow from the refrigerant that had leaked out. So it must have blown a seal or something on the inside that allowed all the coolant to escape, and it was kind of flung around, so you couldn't really see it in concentrated fashion like this. But nevertheless, it had escaped the system, probably through that area somewhere, which led me to believe that this compressor was all done. Here's the compressor going back in. It's a good idea to not tighten down the bolts as you put them in, but thread all 4 of them, the 2 at the top and the 2 at the bottom, loosely to make sure that all of them are threading before you tighten them down. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time lining up the holes. I thought it might be a good idea to, before I drop the alternator back in, I've got all the compressor bolts tightened in, to thread the serpentine belt. Since I've got a bunch of room there, it'd be even harder to thread once you get the alternator back in there. But it's, you know, I went way back, all the way wrapping around that far pulley. Not even sure what that pulley is, but power steering or something, I don't know. Anyway, make sure you pay attention to which pulley goes which way that belt wraps, and then just refeed it around all the threads and just leave some slack down here around the compressor, so it'll be easier to put on. Alright, I'm going to redo the gaskets and oil them down with compressor oil, this PAG 46 stuff. So I've got the low pressure line right there hanging over the edge. That just goes right on the top of the compressor. The high pressure line I have sitting here in my lap, and there's one connection there, and there's one connection there. So there's 3 of them that I need to do right now. I honestly found that the putting back on of the alternator and the serpentine belt was probably among the most challenging things. I found that that 19mm bolt down there that is the tensioner, when you push it that way and it puts slack in the belts, that function seemed to work better when the whole alternator assembly was nice and tight and everything was screwed in. I was trying to take it off with bolts loosened, and that tensioner thing with the hydraulic tensioner was harder to do with that being loose. So when I installed it, I put all the bolts in first, then I tightened them down, then I put tension on that to fiddle with the belt. It might be a 2-person job. I managed to do it myself, but it might be a lot excuse me, a lot easier to have one person get on the bar to put slack in the belt, and then just while they're holding it in place, have someone else go in there and monkey around with the belt to get it where it should go. It wanted to keep slipping off back here. There is a place way in the back that you can stick your hand, that you can get your hand in contact with the belt on that the deepest pulley in there. So that's what you have to do. But this is all put together now. Now I'm going to move back out here. I've just got to hook up the condenser and put that back together and get the bumper back on.